When I was a senior in college at the University of Texas, I had a head-on collision. This accident broke my back in 3 places, and I was waiting desperately for an ambulance.
All right, we are back with another episode on this segment I call Afterlife. My guest experienced a profound near-death experience during her senior year of college. This experience guided her to teach overseas in public schools and at a college level. Her near-death experience story has been featured on I Survived, Beyond, and Back, Season 1 of Life to Afterlife, Death, and Back, National Geographic Magazine, Women's World Magazine, Coast to Coast AM, GAIA, WFAA, and the Dr. Oz Show. She has also wrote a book called Angels in the OR, What Dying Taught Me About Healing, Survival, and Transformation. She also has a YouTube channel called Be the Light of Your Own Healing, with just over 22,000 subscribers and 1.5 million channel views. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Tricia Barker.
I'm so happy to be on your show.
Yeah. So before we start, I thought it'd be great for us to start with some icebreakers to get the ball rolling. How's that?
Sounds great.
All right. Hiking in nature or jogging on a park trail?
Oh man, hiking in nature at this point, but I love both. It's just, I'm 50 now, I'm not right out of college, so running is not an option that often. College,
Yeah. Spotify or Apple Music?
Both, but I haven't logged into Spotify in a while, so Apple.
Apple. Ramen noodles or chicken noodle soup?
Ooh, chicken noodle soup.
Android or iPhone?
iPhone.
Vegetarian or carnivore?
I say that I'm like 70 to 80% vegetarian, so I just can't be fully, because I appreciate what other people cook. But when I'm cooking myself, vegetarian.
Yeah. Wine or beer?
Wine.
Potato salad or mashed potatoes?
Ooh, mashed potatoes.
Okay. Traffic on the road or 4-hour flight delay?
4-hour flight delay. I'm terrified of cars.
If you could watch one movie for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Dreams by Kurosawa.
Okay. All right. If you were granted 3 wishes, what would you wish for?
I'll take a cue from what I read about in my book, which was lucid dreaming. When I got out of my body, the first thing I wished is for no suffering, so enough for everyone across the world. So that was my soul's first desire, is for all of us, myself included, to have enough, water. And then, I think it is to have a more compassionate world and compassionate society. So moving away from war and division and into this understanding of oneness with each other in nature. And beyond that, I think maybe give everyone a connection to God. That's what gets us through.
Yeah, I agree with that. Who in life has inspired you the most?
Oh, so many people along the way, but I went into education mainly because school was a safe place, and so teachers were kind. A couple of professors were also a great inspiration, and really just in how they lived their lives too.
Yeah. And last but not least, in your own words, how do you now feel about time?
Oh, time. Yeah, so there wasn't any time on the other side, so now I feel sort of encumbered by it at times. But I have fun with it. So time is something I never wear watches, so I have a good internal sense of direction and time after the near-death experience. Don't know why, but I generally can get the time within 15 minutes without a watch
Awesome.
or phone.
Awesome. So, interview actually through the Life to Afterlife, Death and Back. I saw that one initially. I think your testimony was like closer to like maybe the end of it, and so when I saw yours, I was like, wow, that was pretty intense. And I think what got me was that like I could relate to it in a way. Like it didn't seem like you were, because I watch a lot of near-death experiences, and I always look to see if someone is putting on for the sake of like the testimony or the camera. But you just seemed very natural when you were talking about it. It didn't seem like you were trying to tell more than what happened. So that is what made me want to look into more of, you know, your other interviews as well. And then I interviewed Chris, Chris, and he said that, yeah, you would be a great person to kind of reach out to and get your experience in person. So I said, after speaking with Chris, he's a great guy. So anyone he refers to me, I pretty much trust his referral. So I do want to say that I got into near-death experiences during the pandemic. It was during that time where like the world was upside down. And I feel like during that time, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the first time that I felt like, wow, at any moment, someone can be out of here. And it has nothing to do with like your current health history, anything. It's just this pandemic is making us all sit down and see that, hey, we are not invincible. And so for some reason, near-death experiences was a topic that just popped up on my feed. I started watching a lot of Iron's material. I ran into this one thing about Dr. Mary Neal. She was the first one I saw. And then from hers on upward, even to the Peter Panagores, to the Howard Storms, like I couldn't stop watching it because I was intrigued with what so many people have seen, and just the similarities and what they came back with. So in my mind, I said either this is the biggest conspiracy that people are making up, or there has to be some truth to it. So before we get started with your near-death experience, what do you think you came back with even until today?
So many things, but you know how people always say, oh, it's like a dream. No, like I forget dreams from 3 weeks ago, from last night. I never forget the near-death experience because it's just like outside of time, outside of the realm of what we normally see. And, it's always vivid in my mind. So, telling the story is never a problem. So that's different, to remember something so clearly. Another thing that changed me was my whole value system, really. In a major way that I understand. I really get it that a lot of misery comes from too much self-focus. And that when you get out and you try to spread kindness and you try to help others and you have a profession that helps others, even this YouTube channel that you're doing, it spreads light, it helps others. Anything that you do to help others puts you in the flow of life, and that's a beautiful thing. Also, it's hard to describe, but my consciousness was so contained in my body before the near-death experience, and now it's kind of just it merges with a lot of things in strange ways, but I just don't feel like localized in my body. It's that's a different way of putting it, but I just was so encased in the body and so encased in kind of rational thought that the idea of intuition was not really something I paid a lot of attention to before the MD.
How has this shaped your beliefs in religion?
That's been a journey. I love any church where it's just about love, because that was the main message. So, I can pop into any temple, any church, and if the main message is about love, I'm fine. I think where I get off track with some churches is when I hear too much condemnation and too much you're going to hell and too much negativity. But Unity Church suits me pretty well. They tend to refer to Christianity, but they refer to other religions as well for inspiration. And
I'm actually familiar with that. It's like a big, like, kind of, it's like national, but there's one near me called Unity by the Bay, but it's under that umbrella. But I do know they have like their Wednesday meditation stuff, so I have gone there a couple times.
well, that's
But
cool.
yeah, but yeah, I do agree with you. It's like the the more and more I dig into like what I truly believe, the condemnation kind of preaching. I want to say that it's starting to get like very old to me. It's like um, it makes you feel like the person preaching doesn't struggle with anything, or they have it all together, and now they're preaching down at a group of people,
Yeah,
and it's kind of self righteous in a way.
there's something honest and beautiful about sharing what you struggle with, and your
Yeah,
shadow side, really, or just things you're trying to heal in
yeah,
general. And I
right.
think that
Should be
can
two ways.
feel bad, I think. And also it just goes against some of what I know to be true. So if
Hmm.
love is all that matters, like I heard this minister one time say that he told parents whose son had died of a drug overdose that the son was burning in hell. And I was like, no, because he's actually not.
Hmm.
Like I think a compassionate, loving God understands us in our mental illness. It understands us in our pain. It understands us in so many
Yeah,
different ways. And He loves us. And I think people just forget how much we're loved.
right.
Like that's the main thing that I think I took away from it, is that everyone's loved, that everyone has that opportunity to connect to God and feel that love. And when churches remind people of that and remind people of their connection to others, I think it's good. But
Yeah.
holier than thou or self-righteousness or
Hmm.
condemning others,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like the message of Jesus, really.
No,
It's
at all.
everyone.
I agree. So you want to walk me back, just kind of your childhood, and then we can lead up into the actual experience. And I've heard it like at least 3 or 4 times, and it never gets old to me.
Well, but you do interrupt me if you want and ask some specifics or questions.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, in childhood, I grew up in the country, and there was some loneliness to that as an only child. And I don't want to belabor, how difficult childhood was, because I really let go of a lot of that, but it was difficult.
Yeah.
Struggled with poverty. We struggled with my dad not really being around, and my mother had a lot of stress, and I think sometimes she took that out on me. She was a young mom, and so there was some verbal abuse and physical abuse, and it coupled with other judgmental family members and a few other things that happened in my life. By the time I was in seventh grade, I just considered myself agnostic. So I really considered myself like, I love studying, I love academics. It was really, I just wanted to be left alone. So I was so shy and so abused and shut down that I talked to a few people at school. So really, academics was it.
Yeah.
That was all. That was carrying me through. Animals and nature, of course, was important, but I was also somewhat sensitive to people because I was shy, and so I'd look at the various teachers and how superficial they were at times, and
Hmm.
how they weren't helpful to some students. How maybe their prejudices or their someone was popular, they'd give more attention to that person. If they were, in athletics, then they would do that. But someone who was poor, like me, or someone of a different race, a lot of times they wouldn't give the same love to those students. And I looked around and I was like, whoa, something's wrong here if we can't, support the youth. And so I had a lot of thoughts about education, even though I didn't want to go into it. It
Hmm.
was something that I observed and studied. And so I was very excited to go to university. That was my ticket out of East Texas. And What shocked me is when I got there, and this helps me teach college students now, is even though I had all this academic preparation and I didn't experiment with drugs and alcohol in high school, and I was just this like, I was a very studious, on board person, I kind of fell apart at college. I just think I was holding it together the whole time I was at home and never trying to do anything wrong. And then by the time I got to college, I just felt exhausted. Like I'd been pleasing my mom, pleasing everyone around me, and I didn't even really know who I was. And it just felt exhausting. I did discover a more of a social side to myself because I started waiting tables. And unfortunately, though, I started drinking and experimenting with drugs the second year at college. And that kind of made my life a little more chaotic. I was still holding it together with grades, but, there was some depression that was exaggerated because of that. There was, just a lot of pain, emotional pain that I didn't know how to deal with. And a lot of that emotional pain kind of culminated in a breakup. And in that breakup, it was maybe, it was only a few months before my near-death experience. It was around Christmas, and then I had the near-death experience in August. I tried to kill myself. And so I took a bunch of pills and fell face forward onto bed, and 36 hours later my roommate walked in and was like, "You look like crap." Wow. And I didn't even tell my roommate that I had done this. We just went out to brunch, and I had enough sense though to go and get counseling, and my counselor was like, "What did you love?" And I remembered running, and so she put me on this path of running and being healthy, and I ended up basically only having beer. Like that was my way of kind of dealing with everything, and then running all the time. And I got in great shape though, when you're young, you're in that place. It was wonderful. So I was probably in the best shape of my life. And I was training for the Austin 10K, which was in April. And I had the worst dreams right before that accident. It was really strange. I was agnostic at that time, so I didn't understand it. I just thought it was weird. And there were a lot of things that I thought, leading up to the near-death experience, it's almost like the universe was trying to prepare me. But I was just like, I'm losing my mind, or this is a really terrible dream. So the first dream was my dad screaming, "Watch out, Tricia." And the next was my mom screaming like, "Oh no, 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 I can't believe this is happening." And over and over and over again. It was almost like I was outside of time already. So I got in the car to run the race, and I didn't stop for coffee, which I always did. I needed coffee, and it was like an early race, and I wasn't a morning person. And I went through the first light, and it was yellow, and it was a strange intersection, and the next light was red. But I'll never understand why the other guy was going so fast, because we hit each other at a pretty fast clip, both of us. I mean, I had time to throw on my brake, and he put his hands up, I could see, as the windshield crashed into him. And so his windshield broke, but he was in a very big car, and so there wasn't any other damage. My spine was compromised and my back was broken. And so I was slumped over in the car and felt a lot of heat. So a lot of times people think it's really painful, but shock and trauma ends up buffering some of that. So I didn't feel that much pain, but I was just aware that I couldn't sit up straight, that I was leaned up against this window. And that was terrifying to me because I knew something was really, and it was a long wait. I won't get into too many of the details, but here I was, and this is why I just want healthcare for everyone. This has been like a big part of my life because I didn't even think about it. There I was at college, like so many other students trying to make their way into a better life. Never thought about healthcare, getting healthcare. I just thought, or health insurance. I just thought, with my first job, I'll get it. Well, I I didn't have it, and this became an issue. It's not supposed to be an issue at the hospital, but I overheard some nurses talking, and one surgeon chose not to come in on that day because I didn't have health insurance. And so hour by hour, I was losing more feeling in my leg to the point where I couldn't feel my left leg anymore. And I was afraid that I wouldn't walk, that this would stay like this. Well, another surgeon, Dr. Flan was her name, came in and she saw my chart. And I advocated for myself. And I think a lot of people have to do this, that, they become their own advocate. And even though I had family members there at this time, I was alone when I saw her, and I just talked to her like a human being. I was like, Dr. Flan, I understand I don't have health insurance, but I'm a college student, here I'm trying my best, and if you don't operate on me, I'm afraid I'm not going to walk, and if I can't walk, I'm going to kill myself. And so she looked at my chart and was like, very, serious about it. She's like, okay, I will take your case, and I'll tell them that I'll take your case, but I have to go home and eat and rest, and then I'll be back and operate on you. And then I just felt like, okay, here goes. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd have a near-death experience. Even signing that form, 17% chance of death, I thought, I'm young,
right.
I'll either survive this or I won't. But as soon as I was under, the next thing I realized is that I was out of my body. And I know a lot of people, and Chris's story I know really well because he had a head injury. It took him some time to process, all that had happened to him. I just knew immediately, oh my God, I've got to tell my friends we go on. I was wrong.
Like you weren't scared at all.
No, it was beautiful. So that's a really good question. A lot of people ask me, was there any fear? No. The only word fear that I heard was really when God was just kind of showing me that people are either in fear or they're in the light. But no, I felt excited. I mean, I don't know how to explain it any other way other than it was better than a movie. It was seeing this reality that we're in, and then seeing another reality coming forth. And that other reality were these angels that were at the end of the bed. And I do love Chris' story about his angels. Mine were androgynous, and they were very tall, and they were composed of light. They had light that came out of their eyes, and that was the main thing. And I didn't see wings, like a lot of people always want to imagine the angels, but I think they show up in a way that makes sense to us. But they were communicators. They definitely communicated, and they definitely healed through light. And that was the first thing that I saw. And they even spoke to me directly. Like they spoke into my soul, but they also slowed down and said, watch this, because they wanted me to see how they were going to help. So were the neurosurgeons brilliant? Yes, but I think the angels played a part in showing them where the fragments were, or moving them aside, or doing something to ensure that I would walk and ensure that, I would heal. And there's a lot that comes up in this moment, but there was no fear, just kind of amazement that there's this other reality, and that I knew I didn't have to have a long, drawn-out near-death experience. If that's all I got, I would have been happy. I would have been like, yeah, we go on. And in that moment, I just felt so honored that they were there, and so in awe, really, just that they existed. I just called them higher beings or light beings or angels. They all seem interchangeable. They just seemed very intelligent, and like they knew what they were doing. And right. I had no idea what Reiki was or sending energy. I mean, to me, to see this demonstrated looked very bizarre in some ways, but exciting. Just like I felt like we had been playing around. Like all this was theater, and I'd opened up the veil, and I was beginning to see, oh, angels exist. And then since I was in spirit form, I was like, oh, I just kind of knew I could go through the walls. And so I went through the wall into an area where my stepdad was getting a candy bar out of the machine. And I remember thinking, and the verifiable detail of this doesn't matter to me. I just remember thinking he's a health nut, and this is kind of funny that he's eating a candy bar. Maybe he has a secret sugar, addiction. And he does. And so, like that, it was just funny to see it, and I wished him well. And then flying is so much fun. I think anytime anyone has a lucid dream or near-death experience, to just feel that sensation of flying, is amazing. And so I was over the hospital, and then I was in the sky, and then I transitioned into this beautiful landscape of stars somewhere out in the cosmos. And some of those videos from like the James Webb telescope and then the more recent ones remind me of some of that. So I was like really far away from Earth in this realm. And I felt an intelligence coming towards me. I wasn't afraid because I always felt that God was with me to some degree, even though I hadn't even seen God yet. It was just like I felt this energy. And the energy started showing me things. So this light, and I call it the light of God, showed me a consciousness that is amazing. And it projected points of my life into this night sky, and I was shown not to judge others. I was reminded that being in nature is good and healing. And most of all, I was just told we don't take any of this with us. All we take is love. And the love that we spread and the good things that we do, that's what remains. Like that's the truth. And I even remember at times kind of thinking, I'm coming back. The angel said I'm coming back. So is this enough of a message? Like, love is all that matters. Isn't that a Beatles song? Like there were some, I was a little bit skeptical, that that's all I needed to take back. But then I transitioned into this realm where I saw my grandfather, and that was moving, to see someone who was a loving force and a really kind person in my life. To see him there when he had suffered so much physically, and to see him young and vibrant and kind, it was a beautiful moment. So when I saw my grandfather, I made my spirit form into that of a kid because he knew me up until I was 10. So I thought he'll understand.
I had the interview with Sharon Milliman, and one thing she said was that her time there felt more real here. Like, did you get that sense that it didn't feel like a dream when you were in your experience? Did it feel more real than how you are right now?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's an added reality. So this, to some degree, and I know this sounds strange, and I don't buy into that theory of this is all an illusion, but it did feel like theater. It felt like we put on these human bodies in order to live out certain stories, learn certain lessons, but the truth is over there. And it really exists. And the truth is that love is all that there is, and everything that we're trying to remember is, if we could just remember that here, it would be a much better world. Like if everyone could just awaken to that, then I think this would be heaven on earth. But unfortunately, like there's duality. There's fear. There's all kind of things that I think keep us from that. But that seemed to be the truth. Is that realm?
Yeah.
So it was kind of an intelligence or a knowing at first when I heard those early messages, but then when I left my grandfather, I went closer to God, and I knew that I was going towards God at this point, and it felt like home. It felt like I was really coming home, and I felt people's prayers. And so I always tell people, like, hey, prayers are felt. So even if someone passes on, they would feel your prayer as an energy, as a love that's sent to them. And so it is real. And yet what felt more real was being in that presence of God. And as I was going there, it was like my soul was healed of so much. Any child abuse kind of didn't seem to matter anymore. It was just like it collapsed in time, and I knew I was loved. I knew I was worthy. I knew that everyone is. I didn't feel like any pain, and it felt so good to finally be in this place of absolute joy and freedom and no fear, that at that point I was like, yeah, I'm not coming back. Like, I don't want to come back. Never mind. This is great. We'll just stay here. And so that's when I felt this kind of energetic wall come down. And it's like I hit a wall. And then I did hear God's voice as kind of this booming voice. I mean, it was loud and it kind of vibrated through me. A lot of people say, you know, God is genderless too. I mean, because it was loud, it felt masculine, you know, but it was just.
It's all human context, though. Yeah, that's all human context, masculine and feminine. So that's how we can relate to it. But in the end of the day, he's bigger than what we can put labels on.
Exactly. It was just this undeniable. So I think I'll say that about God's voice. If you hear it, it's undeniable. You can't question it. You know, like it kind of rocks you. And so in that moment, you know, I just heard God say, look down. And he showed me many people who were walking along this river. And I understood that some were connected to God, some were not. And it wasn't all their fault. Sometimes they were depressed. Sometimes they were anxious. Sometimes they were, you know, just full of material ideas that separated them from God and spirit. And I just saw that, look, even if someone is agnostic and they have a love for science or they have a love for art and they follow that passion, on some level, they are more in the light of God because they're following what gives them joy. They're doing something joyful. So I really saw that God said through education, so not just spiritual teacher, but you will go back and you will teach in school systems and you will be a teacher. I want you to remind people to turn on their lights and to really be just kind of light filled, if that makes sense. And I remember being upset about that, and that was the only time in the near-death experience when I was upset. And I actually argued with God because I was beginning to remember my human ego, and I was like, no, my whole soul mission, you know, like before this NDE was just to make money and to be successful. And I was like, I can't do that as a teacher. And at that moment, God was laughing. I mean, I don't know how to just any other way other than laughed at me and kind of rolled me up into a ball and threw me back into my body. And it was this force that did that. It wasn't like hands came down. It was just like you're going back to your body. And it felt terrible to go back to the body. You know, like it felt like darkness.
Very dense, yeah.
Yeah, just very dense and dark. Yeah, so I'm glad you asked me to expand on that because I think that near-death experiencers get glimpses. And I think people who truly transition, I think they review the whole life, you know, with God and kind of look at it. And I think a lot of people fear that, but it's a non-judgmental place. It's really just kind of like your soul goes, darn, I could have done better, you know? It's, you know, but your soul also is connected to everyone. And so you see you affected others. And so I think that's the part that I just saw scenes where I was loving nature and I was a kid and I was happy and that was good, you know, just playing and being joyful and enjoying the simple things in life is a good thing. It makes God happy. And praying and meditating, I did some of that as a kid. That was another thing that I saw was good. And then the only quote lesson that I was taught, you know, where I was shown what I did wrong was not the taking of the drugs or, you know, like drinking too much or sleeping around. None of that was condemned, or even killing myself, trying to kill myself. You know, like that wasn't condemned. What was condemned was judging other people and seeing them as less than. And when I saw that there were these cool people at work, they were very loving, but they were older, you know, and so I was in college and in my 20s, and I just thought, I don't want to talk to this older couple, like they're not cool, you know, and so it's just a silly young person's way of defining, like, I'm at the university, I wear Doc Martens, I wear, you know, like they don't, I'm cool, they're not, you know, it was very silly. And what I saw is that they were wonderful people, and I saw into their hearts, and I was so embarrassed.
Wow.
Like, just embarrassed that I was immature, and that I looked at people that way. And I remember kind of telling God in that moment, I won't do that again. I'll look in people's hearts. Like I won't judge the outward in that way. I will judge what's only inside. And it was this moment where I felt better, like about moving forward. It's
So
like a correction.
it seems like it was less God judging you, but you judging yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. No one said that before, but that's true. It's like it was embarrassing to me. Like my soul knew I could do better. That's the best way of putting it. And I think everybody's soul, like if anyone can probably relate to this, if you've had a breakup in your life, you usually look back and go, oh, I wish, I wish I had just said I loved you, this isn't working, or, like just been kind instead of all the stuff that happens when people, get fearful and angry. So I think like when you're leaving your life, you just kind of wish you were better in certain instances. That's, the main wish. And so that life review taught me a lot. And I can say that I was a very different person after. That's another way I was different. Like I'd talk to anyone, homeless people, older people, younger people. I mean, like for those years after my near-death experience, like talk to anyone about anything.
Yeah. So, as far as like your time coming back, explain how the recovery process and adjusting, like first of all to your body after being free from it, and then like how was your relationships after that?
Yeah, great question. So I was aware of the body immediately, but I was also still coming out of anesthesia and confused. And I was also on morphine for 10 days. I was in ICU for 3 days. So the first recollections of my body, I didn't even really feel like I was a part of it fully still. By the time they were giving me ice chips, I felt like I was in the room. I felt like, I was just larger than this body. And they kept asking me, what is your name? And I said, her name is Tricia. And to me, that made sense because I was like, no, I still want to be out there. Like, why am I coming back to this? And I remember sitting there and being a little disappointed. It's like, oh, wait. I have all these emotional wounds and this stuff in my body, and I'd just been somewhere awesome. I mean, it changed me, but I was also aware that I still had healing to do, that I still had a lot to learn, and yet I was so excited about what happened. Like, I couldn't stop talking about it, even though I was on medication. Like, I never stopped talking or trying, to explain some of this. Even when I was in the hospital, I ended up writing down some of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 3 days in ICU, and then 7 more days just in the hospital where they had to. Back then, they put people in body casts, so I had big, steel rods in my back, and then they wrapped me on the 4th day in a body cast. The nurses just turned my body, from time to time, and I didn't stand up until that last day. And I remember that's kind of when it came back to me. I could put my feet in front of each other. I could feel my feet. And I was using a walker. And this 80-year-old man passed me. I just remember thinking, oh, darn, I have a ways to go. This body's going to have to heal a lot. But I walked all the way down and I saw that people were graduating or the lights were on after a game or something. And I just remember thinking, oh, then I just allowed myself to cry a little for the human part of it, for the human part of, oh gosh, I have this injury and I have to go back to school and be a teacher. And it was the only time I let myself feel self-pity, because then I was like, no, flip it. You have a mission from God. How many people get that, direct mission, and I can't go wrong if I follow it. I just kind of knew that I'd be in the right space if I was doing what I was told to do.
Did you ever doubt your experience? Like when you came back, did you say, "Oh, this had to be a dream," or like what convinced you that it was real?
I was convinced from the moment I was out of my body. Like I never really doubted it. The only thing that happened is I had so many paranormal like moments that there were a couple of times, like in early recovery, when I was at my mom's house, that I would go outside of my body just because there was so much pain, and continue to have an out of body experience. And then I
Mm-hmm.
would, did I die? Am I dead? I'd get confused on whether I was really alive or not, and
Wow.
how to get back to my body, and do I want to stay in this body, and am I just going to die? And so there was some PTSD, I think, around
Yeah.
dying, the physical part of it, but there was also so much, I don't know, metaphysical stuff happening that it never stopped, like I stopped. So I think the fact that my reality was so different, and I didn't have a head injury. So, like I just was like, no, this is real. This is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm changed. This is real. And so even when people question me, I think I'm a defiant person. So like maybe that's how I got through childhood abuse, is it's kind of like, well, if you're going to treat me that way, F you, like in my mind.
Yeah.
Like, I tried not to take too much of it in and believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tried my best to stay defiant. And I think when people questioned my experience, I just was like, well, sorry, but this is a reality for me. This is not, this is not something I debate. I think, if anything, even super religious people who say, well, you didn't see Jesus, I heard a message, be like a little child, which is a message from the Bible. And I do love Jesus. I felt his spirit at other times. I've had spiritually transformative experiences where I felt the power of him. I think we just don't, we have to open our minds as a
Yeah.
culture enough to go, hey, this loving, compassionate God is going to meet every person at a different place,
Mm-hmm.
because they are evolving and they are growing. And so, I know that education has been a great path for me, and I don't really see myself leaving it, because it's a great place to help people with anxiety, to help people learn to believe in themselves. And to me, education's like church. Like
Mm-hmm.
it can't be, like when you
Yeah.
teach English and poetry and that kind of thing, because you can inspire people to be their best selves. And that's ultimately, what I want to do is connect people to nature, joy, happiness, their dreams, their
Mm-hmm.
pursuits. And when they're happy and they're doing what they love, I think they spread that to their families, their kids, and it just creates more peace on earth. Oh, that's great that you asked that, because I forgot to say, so many people write to me and write to other near death experiencers. Well, I don't have anyone in my life. I'm not loved. I don't have a relationship. So how can I spread love? No one wants my love. That's not the point. Like, even if you had one day left on earth and you're very old, and you went to a park bench and that's as far as you could walk, and you said something nice to someone, that would be love. So I think love is more in terms of kindness, is my definition. Unconditional love is rare here. That unconditional love of God is very hard to find here. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
people have it, people very close to them, their children, pets, like that. Loving someone unconditionally is hard here.
Mm-hmm.
So much is conditional, and so much is based on survival and our trauma wounds, like colliding up against one another. And there's
Yeah.
there's a lot here that it's hard to stay in unconditional love. It's easier, and this is why I'm a big fan of anything that gives you power in the world. And as a teacher, you do have some power. So you're in authority. But if you can give unconditional love in a role like that, then it's really wonderful, because you don't take anything personally. I mean, I've been called every name in the book. And when I taught junior high and this one kid called me a name, I was like, oh, it doesn't really affect me. My mom called me these things.
Oh
And
no.
he was like, oh, Miss Barker, that's terrible.
So he felt
And
bad.
he felt bad. And then I was like, but why do you do that? What's going on with you? What's your home life like? So I would use humor and just
Mm-hmm.
be real with kids, because oftentimes they were experiencing far worse scenarios than I
Mm-hmm.
did, or even if they weren't as bad, it's still, they're sensitive souls that are going through things. So I was very aware that 1 in 5 kids were kind of on the edge, with a lot of things.
Yeah. And so, what is your perspective on, I guess, peace? Because you kind of say what compassion is, yes. But what about peace?
Peace is being more in tune with nature. And I've never said this on an interview before, and I think this would piss a lot of people off, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think if we gave all the lands of the earth back to the indigenous people who were originally here to start making some suggestions about how to live, and if we really looked to indigenous people and incorporated some wisdom from nature from the beginning of time until now, and merge that with technology, and merge this with a way to end problems around the world, from war to human trafficking to all kind of things that exist. I'm for justice for everyone. I'm for everyone being taken care of. And I know that seems like a weird concept, but
it's not at all. It's so weird. It's weird to us because we've been like blinded by just greed, and we think that we're entitled to certain things. And it's funny that you bring up the indigenous people. Europeans came over to take the land or purchase the land from indigenous people. The indigenous people thought it was a joke. Like, how do you buy land? The land is already here. So they was like, the joke's on you. Here, take it. You can buy it from us. But they didn't realize that someone buying it from you was also them taking everything from you and making you do things that you don't want to do and forcing you out of the land that you had. So just the perspective that they had was that like the land is for everyone. And if we all had that mindset that like there's no such thing as money, there's no such thing as my property, your property, just imagine how much poverty would be taken care of, and just that mindset alone. We have like people in California rotting on the streets, high price apartments that people are getting thrown out of because they can't afford it. Just imagine if we all just had that same mindset to say, hey, we're taking care of each other. Like, if I take care of you and the person behind me is taking care of me, then I don't have to worry about myself because someone's taking care of me. But now we have to keep looking backwards to make sure that we're not getting stabbed in our backs. That's why we lock our doors. That's why we have alarms. That's why we have police. That's why we have the military, because we don't trust each other.
No, and we're meant to be in community, and we're meant to understand one another. That's a human need, and it's incredibly sad. I teach Black Elk, and he was like one of the last people to try to bring all the indigenous tribes together, and it just didn't work. And he really saw that indigenous people would be scattered across the earth, and it was the end for them. And he went to New York, so he was part of this like traveling kind of freak show, in a way, the Wild West show. And he saw New York, and he wrote in his diary, he was like, I don't think it's better than what we have. Yeah, there's big buildings, but there's people on the street who are starving, and no one starved in my tribe. No one was on the street. Like that was a reality to him. And he's like, so you have this great big building, what's the point if so many people are left out? And so this is a conversation that that I think people should be having from a spiritual perspective, because it's a loving perspective ultimately. It's a loving perspective to want that for everyone, and I don't see why it's looked at as not loving, but it is. Yes, take care of yourself. So extend self-love to yourself if you are hurting. I think a lot of people don't understand fully how important it is, and how it's a real deep journey to keep reminding yourself that you're worthy, that you are loved, that you are, if you are ever hurting, and this is an important message that I think Chris and I both tell people is like, reach out to everyone. Tell people you need help now if you're in a bad place, because you are loved by God, and you are here for a reason. You're meant to be here, and life can be so much more joyful with more healing, and with more time in nature, more time in prayer and meditation. Life can shift, and it can get much better.